What's up, guys? Welcome to another fun-filled episode of Horror Needs a Hero. For the month of December, CP and I thought, hey, let's do something special. And actually, CP came to me with this idea of doing Black Christmas, which is kind of a coincidence because when I first started reviewing for this channel, which was almost a year ago now, there were a few movies that I really wanted to put on my radar for reviewing. And of course, those were movies like Halloween, movies like Terminator 2, movies like The Dark Knight, which I haven't even gotten to yet. But one of those movies was Black Christmas. This movie is so important to me. So anyway, get ready for the Drum Dums portion of Horror Needs a Hero, Black Christmas. Black Christmas stars Olivia Hussey, John Saxon, Margot Kidder, and is directed by Bob Clark. So guys, there is so much I could talk about Black Christmas. It means that much to me. And what's interesting is I actually first discovered the movie while I was watching the 25 Years of Terror documentary about the Halloween franchise. Now that documentary came out early in the 2000s, I believe shortly after Resurrection came out. Right at the beginning of the documentary, they mentioned this movie, Black Christmas. And I remember the title really struck me, so I stopped the DVD, I went back, I was like, wait, what is Black Christmas? They're saying that Black Christmas was an influence on Halloween. How come I never knew this? So I became really interested in this movie. And I'm not gonna lie, I thought this was gonna be just some kind of knockoff slasher flick, nothing really that important, because there's a lot of movies, slasher movies even, that predate Halloween. And many of them aren't really that special. But Black Christmas is special. So the story of Black Christmas is this group of sorority girls, they're in this house, and there is this killer on the loose, and he is actually in the house, in the attic. Pretty much most of the movie just really tormenting these girls. The whole time nobody knows that he is actually in the house. And if you're thinking this plot really sounds familiar, it is, because it is really the plot of When a Stranger Calls. But Black Christmas has a lot more going for it than When a Stranger Calls. Now, my initial reaction to watching Black Christmas was I was just blown away. I was like, how have I never heard of this movie? And how has this movie not been universally accepted, not been special like many other slasher movies like Halloween and Friday the 13th? And that story is interesting because when it originally came out in the early 70s, it was a Canadian release. This is a Canadian-made film, and it was very successful in Canada. So successful that Warner Brothers in the US wanted to distribute it. But they didn't like the name Black Christmas because Black Christmas sounds kind of like a blaxploitation film. And Warner Brothers did not want to confuse the audience. So they changed the name to Silent Night, Evil Night. And for one reason or another, when they screened it for US audiences, it just wasn't accepted. As a matter of fact, many of the audience members didn't know that it was a Christmas horror movie when they came to see it. And it's not just a run-of-the-mill horror movie, it's really creepy. It really gets under your skin. And to tie the sacred holiday of Christmas in that, it just rubbed viewers the wrong way. So Black Christmas was really all but forgotten for the better part of 2 decades. And there was a resurgence in the early 2000s. And I'm wondering if maybe that documentary about Halloween might have helped that. Because I remember right after that documentary, all of a sudden people started talking about Black Christmas again, and there were websites made for Black Christmas. Also, it's interesting to note that Quentin Tarantino actually had a private reel of Black Christmas way before it became popular in the 2000s. And now Black Christmas is really celebrating a cult status. It's finally getting its just desserts. It's being recognized as one of the greatest slasher films of all time. And that is a title that is well deserved. Let's talk about this movie. So now there are a few things that really came together that made Black Christmas so special. One of them is the characters. Now when Bob Clark first wrote this script, he wrote them as college girls, but he didn't think that college girls should be treated like teenagers. These were young adults, and he treated the characters as such. Main character Olivia Hussey is a prime example. She does not act like your normal teenage fodder. She seems like she's intelligent, she has her whole life ahead of her, she acts like an adult. And so do all the girls in this movie. Also, there is just such an eerie vibe to this movie, partly because of the house. The house itself is a character in the movie. It's just one of the creepiest looking houses I think I've ever seen on screen. They filmed the movie in Toronto, Canada, in the dead of winter, and when you watch this movie, you feel cold. That's how cold the screen looks in this movie. You can clearly see the breath on the actors when they're outside, and a lot of the scenes were actually filmed late at night, like 1 o'clock in the morning. And it really just has that low budget look, that 16mm film type look. Another thing about this movie that is done so perfectly is the score. The score to Black Christmas is probably one of the most underrated horror scores I have ever heard. It is creepy, it gets under your skin, and they even use some Christmas music in this movie, but even the Christmas music sounds eerie and creepy. Director Bob Clark really knew what he was doing with this movie. And let's talk about Bob Clark for a second. Many of you might not know that Bob Clark actually directed A Christmas Story 10 years after he directed Black Christmas. Now, these are two Christmas movies that are completely different. And when you watch Black Christmas from start to finish, you can tell that Bob Clark had his hand in everything. He, like John Carpenter, is a great director. Some movies you watch and you think, okay, they didn't care about these characters, they didn't care about the story at all. They just were phoning the whole movie in. Bob Clark, every scene in this movie, it looks like it was handled with tender loving care. And finally, I want to talk about Billy. Like the score, Billy is probably one of the most underrated killers in cinema history. The way this character was handled was flawless. He would call these girls in the house, and from the first words that came out of his mouth, you could tell that this was a psychopath, a completely deranged lunatic. And everything he says to these girls on this phone is really just creepy as hell. It just gets under your skin. You want to take a shower after you listen to Billy talk. But the one thing about Billy that is handled so perfectly is you never see him through the whole movie. You only see bits and pieces and shadows of him. You see maybe an eyeball, which is one of the most iconic scenes I've ever seen in a slasher movie, by the way. But they never show his face. He is ambiguous all the way to the very last frame of this movie. And all the kills in this movie, they're handled really well. And the one that really gets under my skin is the first kill in the movie. One of the girls, she goes to the closet and Billy comes out, takes a clear garbage bag and suffocates her to death. And so throughout the rest of the movie, she is sitting in a rocking chair in the attic, and Billy just kind of laughs at her, talks to her even from time to time, and she's just sitting there rocking and she's dead. And there's one scene in the movie where this cat, and this was not planned, when they were filming the scene, this cat just comes into the scene, goes up to her and starts licking her mouth while she's got the plastic bag on, and they left it in the movie because it's just creepy as hell. Now, the last thing I want to talk about is really the legacy of Black Christmas and how Halloween and Friday the 13th and all these other slasher movies, they actually owe a huge debt to Black Christmas. As a matter of fact, if you want to talk about similarities, look at the opening shot of Black Christmas. Halloween looks very similar to it. You got this killer looking at this house, and the camera is from the killer's point of view. And he walks around the house, he walks up into the attic, and the scene in the beginning of Halloween is very similar. And to take it even further, they never did a sequel to Black Christmas. And a young John Carpenter, now this is a legend, but a young John Carpenter comes to Bob Clark and he says, hey, are you going to do a sequel to Black Christmas? And Bob Clark says, no, I'm not. And so Carpenter says, well, if you were going to do one, what would you do? And Bob Clark said, he would be in a mental ward and he would escape on Halloween night. How crazy is that? And John Carpenter, according to a legend, took that story and it turned into Halloween. Now, there are people in the industry that refute that story, but it's out there. And the proof is in the pudding, because if you look at Black Christmas, you can tell it really kind of laid the groundwork, the foundation for the modern slasher movie. So guys, that is my review for Black Christmas. Obviously, I'm going to give this movie Trapped on an Island. It is one of the greatest horror films I have ever seen. And not just horror, it's one of the greatest films I've ever seen. I love Black Christmas. I watch it every December. If you haven't seen Black Christmas and you love horror movies, definitely check it out. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching Horror Needs a Hero. CP and I really appreciate it. And guys, like and subscribe if you like what you hear. Follow me on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and Humdrum out.